Dear all, my name is Grzegorz Jankowicz, and this is a series of talks called New European Canon. I conduct these conversations on behalf of Biuro Literackie, and New European Canon is a project carried out by Biuro. It aims at publishing 21 books within 3 years. Actually, 7 of them were already published this year. 3 books of poetry, 3 books of prose, and 1 book for children each year. Together, they will create a mixture of new voices, new narratives, new stories about complicated European identities and individual as well as collective experiences of people living in Europe. Today, my guest is Aleš Šteger. Hello, Aleš.
Hello.
In a response to my questionnaire about literature and community, you wrote that good literature cannot be utilitarian, which does not mean that it cannot be useful. These are your words. Why can it be utilitarian and didactic? For example, Bertolt Brecht would disagree with you, claiming that good literature is the one that trains and educate. Even he would even say train the audience.
Perhaps the audience, but not the regular citizen.
Mm-hmm.
And there is, I think, there is a gap with which, if we look at European literatures of the last 200 years, there is always this struggle, basically, between the individual vision of the author, so to speak, and the political framework which wants to absorb, so to say, the work, interpret it in a very specific way. And we know it's not how literature works. If it is true literature, if it's really high quality literature, it always implies a multiplicity of reading possibilities. And this is basically something that is always subversive to what ideology in its core is. The ideology always wants to define a very specific vision of how society should be. Art always undermines it. Even in cases like Bertolt Brecht, where there is, which are being backed basically by this great attempt of establishing on an artistic level firm ground for a new society. Even in these cases, the subversive in literature cannot be excluded, and basically, on a final level, it creates Brecht being put in a corner, sitting in his Mercedes, driving over the border to West Berlin shopping. I mean, it's much more tricky as perhaps authors like Brecht wanted to see it.
Mm-hmm. You also wrote that literature can produce community. How can literature do it? How can literature achieve that aim?
More and more over the years, with writing also prose and different experimental forms of literature, I came to the conclusion that, first of all, it's me as a subject, as an author, or as a producer of art, my story is not important. Mm-hmm. My personal story is not important. What really matters is this in-between, is the text as a middle ground, basically, which has no value at all as such. It has only value and possibilities and can be source of inspiration and food for others only if being read. Mm-hmm. So basically it's the text and it's the reader who comes in with his basically projections, views, aims, hunger. And what happens there, if they coincide, they become in a way part of a society of readers. So the text basically serves as an orientational tool for everyone who really engages with this text, forming a community of readers. They don't know for each other mostly, but through the text they exist. And I think this level of connections that we are part of, regardless whether we know about it or not, is basically the basic firmament of society. It's not only voters, identified people, people measured, people with chips or phones that are being followed. It's actually on a spiritual level, people organizing around small magnetic fields, so to say, and there's where art and texts come in.
I like your idea about of abandoning the self, abandoning the perspective of a subject, and taking the perspective, the point of view of the other, not necessarily human other. But are we really able, through literature, to abandon the self and take this other position?
Probably not, but as Beckett said, you have to fail better. So
each time.
Each time. So, you know, there is this really radical attempt that you try to conduct to see through the eyes of the other, be it object, animal. It also creates immediate a different ethic, a different kind of being in the world, because it's not the Western eye being the master of the universe, but it relativizes basically our existence, and it gives basically voice to everything what's surrounding us. And it's a complete different perspective. We cannot, of course, remain in this perspective. If we would remain in this perspective, eventually I think it would lead to suicide.
And why is that? Why would we
because the split between,
eliminate ourselves?
Because the split between the I as we were taught to live, the way the human is constructed, and this plurality of perspectives, which enables basically the most vulnerable and small. This split becomes too big. We have seen it in many cases of artists. There is a Slovenian poet, a visionary poet, Jure Detela, who basically at one level stopped eating and drinking there are small organisms even in water. I don't want to drink it anymore, for example. I mean, it can go so far. So this splits taken seriously, and it makes sense only to take them very serious, are just too big.
In the Book of Things, your book of poetry, you adopt the point of view of the other. And the other can be an egg, it can be a cat, or even a sausage. And I wonder, how do you choose these elements of the world or entities belonging to the world? How does it come to you that you should take a position, for example, of an egg? Beautiful poem presenting us an eye of an egg staring at us. Yeah. It's an absolutely amazing concept. But how does it come to you that you decide to focus on this particular entity?
I think basically that every human being has the capacity of visionary thinking and seeing, and therefore basically every one of us could do art or write, perhaps, or choose other artistic means, but because it's how the human brain works. We see certain things, but we have to also empower the seeing that goes on. So there are small epiphanies, moments of epiphany. You see something, and it's only you in this universe who sees that in this way, in that way. But usually we let it pass. But if we would stop and give it power and listen to what it's saying, this moment, this image, then great things can develop. And this is also how the first poems of Book of Things came into being, these moments of epiphany. But then there was, later on with writing more poems of that kind, I started to discover a pattern, which is quite a biblical pattern. It's from Genesis. And it's just, I was following, in the book, I'm following 7 times the same story. And it's the story of the first days of creation prior to the creation of man. And as the objects or plants and animals follow in this in my book, that's the way, the order how the world is being created in the Genesis. So this is the subtext, but it's
even the title of your book suggests this context.
Yes, although I think, how shall I say, this is intellectual play rather. And I think it's not necessary to connect to it while reading any of these poems. These poems should also stand for itself. They should have the presence.
And they have an existence by themselves as autonomous texts. I mean, even outside of the book, outside of the collection, they are like they have autonomy that strikes the reader immediately.
How shall I say? Sometimes we are enabled to slow down the movement of matter. So, and in a playful way, we can absorb and reproduce perhaps some of the sounds of the universe. And this playfulness, I think, somehow came into a few of these poems. And even I sense it now, after so many years after I've written it. I mean, there is this playfulness which is only rarely, how shall I say, only rarely we are in the position, we as writers, as poets, we are in the position to have this state of mind, to be able to play in that way. It's very close to how
to fail
children do.
So well.
to fail even more playful.
Exactly. These are your words from the response to my question about literature and community. To oppose a new political dynamics, to deal with it, we need new languages and narratives. What kind of languages and narratives do we need to oppose, to reject the political dynamics that influences us?
I mean, we all feel, consciously or not, that the common rhetorics and the narratives that we are surrounded by and moved by and controlled by are a partial lie. So we know there is a deep longing and need for something else. We don't know what it is. We can never know. If we would knew, it would be already on the side of the old somehow. But I think it's really one of the tasks of the artist to consciously search for possibilities, to be a small laboratorium of a quest, a permanent quest for new narratives. Sometimes, of course, the past is the biggest source of new narratives. One discovers something in the past that was covered and with oblivion and reactivates, remodels. So it's a permanent, how should I say, awakening from the death that is going on, but with new layers of experience and insight and new constellations, of course. Nowadays, our world became so fast and so easily manipulative. So it's extremely hard to conduct a quest for narratives that would be really producive on a broader scale.
You wrote that contemporary poets, writers in general, face more pressure from their own circles than from the regime or the state or the national community. What do you mean by that? What kind of pressure you feel as a poet?
This is. I was writing this a couple of years ago, I think, and the world radically changed within the last 5-6 years. We all know the time between 2000 and perhaps, I don't know, 2014, 15. It was a time of, how shall I say, abundance of possibilities, freedom. At least I experienced it that way. There were economic concerns, but the globalization machinery seemed to work quite properly, and the world was somehow opening and uniting. And at that point, I think, coming from a country that, and having grown up in still in the last sides of communism, if I've compared the pressures of writers in times of totalitarian regimes and what was around 2000, 2010, what kind of pressures authors were exposed, I thought that, I mean, the pressures were coming much more from smaller circles, critics, etc. Nowadays, I think this is changing again dramatically. I think with the pandemic, with the Russian aggression on Ukraine, with splitting up into polarized political entities of the entire world, we will very soon be again where we used to be, and we wanted to get out of that immediately. So the pressures put on everyone who will have a public voice won't come anymore only from the side of critics and marketing teams, but they will increasingly become politicized, I assume.
But are you optimistic about the possibility of increasing the impact of poetry on the community, on the society, on contemporary readers?
You know, the Enzensbergian number, Hans Magnus Enzensberger claimed that there are 1,364, if I'm not mistaken, readers of poetry in every society, every language. So we are always talking to the happy few, and this won't change. I remember when I had my selected poems in China published, they on Beijing University they organized a symposium, and I was confronted with the question by some of the Chinese poets whether I do not regret, as coming from Central Europe, the old good days where poets could appear in stadiums and speak to a much larger audience than nowadays. I mean, I don't regret this. I think I deeply not only believe, I know about the power of poetry, and I know it has the power to change people, change people's minds, and over a long time span remain. But on the other hand, it won't change the masses, and certainly it's not the medium of the future, because it only until a very limited level it does, how shall I say, being used as a form of social media, of all this technological development, which is much more visual than only letter on the page or something read aloud. So it will probably remain aside of general trends, but with this it will also remain empowered to be much less attacked or in focus of possible influences, be it ideological or market driven. So I experience it basically as a space of freedom and experiment, and there is a price you have to pay for it, and I gladly pay the price and don't go to stadium readings.
Aleš, thank you for this conversation. Dear audience, I recommend you the book of things, and please check our other conversations from this series, New European Canon of Literature. Thanks again.
Thank you.